But I am so excited for this panel. Thank you all for coming. This is the Veronica Roth Spotlight. And for some reason, they called it Stranger Things. Were you on the show Stranger Things?
No.
No, okay.
I think it was like a...
They were like, what's cool?
Everyone on this panel writes about strange things.
Do you like Egos or
Sure,
mixed? Yeah. Okay. My Stranger Thing jokes are landing. No, this is an incredible panel of people, and I guess I'll go from the end. Amy Lukavics, is that correct? Lukavics. Yes. I say it Lukavics. Is the author of The Ravenous, which was published in September of last year, and is the rare novel that makes you root for cannibals. A must-have for horror collections, School Library Journal called it, and for budding Stephen King fans. It was nominated for a Bram Stoker Award, and more importantly, everyone take out your phone right now and add her upcoming novel, Nightingale, set in an asylum in the 1950s on Goodreads, because you have to read it. Next to her is Daniel Kraus. He is the author of numerous books, one of which is called, so my name is Charles Finch, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm a novelist, and I write literary criticism for the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Chicago Tribune. And one of your books is called Killing Something Finch. Is that right?
That is incorrect.
Okay, good. Well, I should just be fine then. With Guillermo del Toro, he wrote Troll Hunters and the novelization of The Shape of Water. So if you have any questions about having sex with a fish, this is your guy.
I have a lot of questions.
I mean, just how is the main, okay. He has either won or been nominated for the Odyssey, Bram Stoker, and Parents' Choices Awards, and from what I understand, his next project is a continuation of George Romero's The Living Dead, which is incredibly exciting. Next to him is Nnedi Okorafor?
Nnedi Okorafor.
Nnedi Okorafor. Well, let's just move on. You've all heard of her. No, she is the author of the beloved Binge trilogy, which won the Hugo and Nebula Awards. I could say a lot more, but Ursula Le Guin, who was one of my favorite writers, said of her, there's more vivid imagination in one page of Nnedi's work than in whole volumes of ordinary fantasy epics. What a tribute. That must have felt so good. Next to her, we have our debut novelist, and this is the most exciting thing you can be, is like have your first baby out in the world after imagining it for so long. Her name is Veronica Roth, and her beautiful and evocative The Queen's Rising came out in February. A sprawling, girl-powered fantasy and a compelling page-turner, according to School Library Journal. It's already been translated into 400 language? It's in...
I don't even know the number. I think 10 other countries?
10. I can hear that southern accent. 10 other languages. That is welcome on a cold day in Chicago. And Veronica Roth, next to me, of course. Well, yeah, thank you. Yes, do that. Do that thing. If any of you have been in a coma for the last 10 years, well, first of all, Donald Trump from The Apprentice is the president of the United States now.
That's the first thing you say to someone when they wake up from a coma.
That's what I would want to know. I don't know, what would you tell what would be the first thing you'd tell someone?
It's gonna be okay, but...
There's good news and bad news. The good news is Veronica Roth has been writing novels. So she wrote, of course, the world-conquering Divergent trilogy, and now we're 3 days away from the publication of the second novel in her duology, Carve the Mark duology. Is that a fair appellation?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. It seems like not really, but...
no, I mean, I don't know what to call it. So
okay.
Carve the Mark and The Fates Divide.
And the new book is called The Fates Divide. And I am so excited to read it. I pre-ordered it.
Well, thank you.
So please give the entire panel, and most of all me, a huge round of applause. Okay, so let's get down to it. I think, you know, in panels like this, I've been and I've moderated on different panels like this, and often they start with the really heavy questions. I want to do the opposite and start with a speed round. Can we do that? So we just get to know all of you a tiny bit?
Okay, yeah.
You all look deeply uncomfortable.
So
Everyone leaves. Okay, so here, just you can answer quickly, or you can, a sentence or two, starting with Amy and coming this way. Okay. What book are you reading right now?
The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay.
And how is it?
It's so good.
Nice, okay.
This is really off-brand, but I'm reading a gigantic history of the actress Barbara Stanwyck.
And good, would you recommend?
Yeah, if you've got an extra, like, 2 years, it's volume 1, and it's like 1,000 pages.
Okay. Nnedi?
I'm reading Exit Wounds.
Okay, nice.
And it's awesome. It's awesome. It's a book that, I mean, I've read 3/4 of it while severely jet lagged, and it takes a really good book to do that.
Yeah, that is impressive.
Yeah.
Does it feel a little dreamlike because
Yes.
you were? Yeah, exactly. Becca?
I'm reading The Bells by Danielle Clayton, and it is so good.
Ooh, nice.
And I swear I'm not making this up. I'm reading Binti Masquerade.
Oh, heck yeah. There you go.
God, so on brand.
I know.
Okay, let's start with Amy again. What music are you listening to right now? What's your song of the moment?
It's more so like the Philip Glass station on Pandora. 'Cause
So
I
just
listen to that
silence?
while I write. Yeah. No words. Or
That's a-
like, I
that's
don't
a
know,
great answer. I
Like
mean, that's
Modest
really-
Mouse. I don't know.
Okay. Everyone hates the speed round so far. It's going great.
Yeah, this is just awful. I'm listening, no one's going to know what I'm talking about, but I'm listening to an artist named C, like the letter C, Diab, D-I-A-B. It's this sort of ambient, I don't even know what you'd call it. It's weird, but I like it.
See, I find that fascinating. Nnedi?
I'm still stuck on the Black Panther album.
Oh, so am I.
It's on repeat, just from beginning to end on repeat. Yeah.
Rebecca?
I'm listening to Two Steps from Hell. I love these like epic trailer musics. They really inspire me when I'm writing, so that's what I'm listening to right now.
The last song I listened to before I came here was Fighting Fish by Dessa.
Huh. Interesting. Okay. And do you guys listen to music while you write? This is like a question that I feel like I get all the time. Yes,
Yeah.
no,
Yes.
maybe. All of you. Wow.
Definitely, yes.
What's the last TV show you binge watched?
Grey's Anatomy.
Ooh. It's like a
I'm
380
late
hour
to the party, but
commitment.
I'm here.
Years, obviously many years late, I finally started watching The X-Files. And I'm about halfway through it. I needed to take a long break, but I'm going to get back to it soon.
Starring Barbara Stanwyck.
Yep.
No. Nnedi?
I am really jet lagged, and I cannot remember the name of because it's a TV show. It was about slavery. It only had one season, and they only had it. They had it on Netflix in England because I was just there 2 days ago, and
Shout it out. Does anyone
what
know
was
it?
it called? Underground. Thank you. Underground. Yes, and I
Underground.
binge watched that because I could download the Netflix episodes while I was in England, and it's not available here.
Ooh,
so I had
nice,
to
okay.
watch. Yeah.
Okay, so I've been binge watching Dexter with my husband, and this has been kind of going on for a while because there's like 8 seasons. So we go through cycles where we're like, watch a lot of Dexter, then we take a break from it, then we watch a lot of Dexter and take a break. And so I'm from Atlanta, and I just flew up last night, but like about 2 nights ago, we got all the way up to like the season finale, and I was like to my husband, like, you better not watch this without me, because we're almost to the end, but.
And I've been binge watching The Great British Bake Off.
Ooh. It's so soothing.
It's really soothing. They're so nice to each other.
I know. There's no villain.
No,
It's
they
just
learn things.
yeah. And they know how to bake so much stuff.
I
That's
know.
one of
Well,
my
I'm
observations.
like really, all I want is sponge cake right now. A Genoese sponge, please.
What do you think of that Paul Hollywood, though? I'm down on him. No one cares. Okay, let's get a little more involved. What's the first book that you remember changing your life? And anyone can answer if they think of it. Why don't we start here, maybe? Veronica, do you have like a book like? I feel like for a lot of people, it's Where the Red Fern Grows.
No, I don't remember that one. Was that with the dogs?
I think a dog dies.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, that didn't change my life exactly, but it made me very sad. This is hard. It was probably either A Wrinkle in Time or The Giver, because I read them around the same time.
Ooh, great
Yeah.
answers.
Good classic. Yeah.
Did you see A Wrinkle in Time yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
I don't see movies very often.
Okay. Has anyone seen it? Is it good?
Yes.
I'm getting some of this. It was okay.
It was excellent.
It was excellent? Okay, good. I'm going to take your word for it. Rebecca?
Okay, this is a hard question, but I think I'd have to say The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I was obsessed with that book when I was a kid, and so much that there was this closet in my house, and it was like a really strange closet. There was like a step in it, and I would go sit in that closet as a kid and like try so hard to get to Narnia. So I feel like that book probably.
Mine is a little strange because of the age that I read it. It's the Stephen King's It.
Oh,
And I read-
no.
Yes. I'm still scared of the clown. I still am. I read it when I was 12. And it was the first really long novel that I had read, and when I picked it up, I didn't even know that it was an adult book. I just saw like a sewer with a claw coming out of it, and that looked really cool. And so I just started reading, and I read the first page, and I did not stop reading it from that point on, even though it scared the hell out of me. To this day, I cannot reread the whole thing. And that was the first book where, after reading it, it affected, even though it scared me deeply, it really showed me the power of storytelling.
Amazing.
So in that way, it really affected me.
I didn't really have an answer until you just said that. I also read it at 12, but I think the book that I'm going to one-up you slightly. At 10 years old, I read Cujo, and I think I had a similar reaction, and part of what was so exciting about it were all the things that I couldn't understand. There was a lot of adult stuff, there was sex stuff, there was...
This is the dog book?
The dog book, okay. Yeah. There are human characters in the book. And I think the amount of stuff that I couldn't wrap my head around and was puzzling to me is what has always driven me as a reader to try to figure it out. And what are these things that I don't understand? Why don't I understand them, and how can I understand them? And plus, there was like lots of like dog murders.
Just like Where the Red Fern Grows.
I feel like when I try to think of a memory of like a book that really affected me was probably when I first discovered Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark in my school library. It was just, the language is so simple and straightforward, and like, that person's dead, you know? And it's like, that's not something you really read as a kid, but more so the illustrations that accompanied the stories were so atmospheric, and I think I like obsessively checked them all out many times in a row. I was very into them, so that may be like a little bit of a dip into when I started getting into horror, that and like Goosebumps.
Well, I think that's actually a really good access point to maybe the first like longer, more involved question that I would like all of you to maybe discuss among yourselves, and I can step back a little bit and you can chat now that we know you. All of you seem to write these books about what the panel has chosen to call Stranger Things or the Upside Down, and I'm wondering why you think that is so, why the least comfortable ideas and the least comfortable places the imagination can go are often such a comfort to us when we're teenagers or when we're, you know, coming into adulthood. All of you seem to work in that space where you sort of go to really dangerous places of the mind, and a lot of readers also find huge comfort and, I guess, consolation and solace in your books. And I'm wondering why you think that is, and what you think, what exorcism you think you're performing, or why you think your books work the way they do. It's sort of an open-ended question, but if anyone...
I feel like to shine light on things that are not normally talked about in everyday conversation, but things that everyone thinks about. It's kind of validating to see that other people are worried or scared or curious about certain subjects that you may be too embarrassed to admit in everyday how's the weather conversation, like, oh, but this really dark thing, like it's not really a natural, an easy conversation, but I think when you're reading books that deal with that stuff, it really helps to see that other people think about as twisted things as you do, and I think it's just how humanity sort of tries to figure itself out ultimately.
Yeah, and just to add to that real quick, I think you mentioned the fish sex earlier. And yeah, I mean, it is a comical topic in some ways, but it's, you know, it's, when you talk about addressing things that people aren't comfortable talking about, it's, you put these things out there and it turns out that people are just waiting to talk about it. You know, like, I can say one thing, when I came up with the idea of Shape of Water when I was a little kid, I wasn't thinking there was going to be millions of people thinking about having sex with a fish guy. But it has meant something to people beyond what I could have imagined and what Guillermo could have imagined, and people have connected to it and drawn from it that this is not about sex with the fish guy. This is about relationships and love and sex with people who are different and different in any number of ways. And so I think these things, when we do talk about some of these dark or strange things, as soon as we bring them into the light, then maybe they're not so dark and they're not so strange. Not all the time, anyway.
It was so not. I was wary of the movie when I went to see it because I was like, "What is this going to be like? Am I going to get on board with this like romance?" You know. And honestly, it was like she had such a tenderness toward him and such a kindness. I don't know. It didn't matter. Like, it's like, whatever. I don't need to know the mechanics. Like, so I do. Yeah. Well, she does like a whole jet. You should just, you know, think about it.
I was being glib when I called it a fish sex movie. Obviously, it's an enormously successful movie and story. So yeah.
But I'm with you, Amy, in that I think it was never comforting to me when adults would pretend that dark and scary things didn't exist. And I think that's what we think of when we think of comforting things, like, oh, that's fine, it's not here. Because when I was a kid, I was anxious, and I knew that there were bad things out there, and what I find comforting, and I found comforting and still find comforting, is when someone says, like, I believe you, like, you're right, those things exist, and we're gonna talk about them. And it takes some of that like anxiety away, because the anxiousness comes from the thing in the dark, not from seeing the thing in the dark, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah,
No, just to kind of add to, because I agree with everything that's been said, I also like to revel in the horror. There's a part of me, because even when I first started reading and became obsessed with books, the genre that I immediately gravitated towards was horror. I read a lot of horror, especially in my teens, and it wasn't so much that I found it comforting. I think a part of me was really obsessed with the mysterious and the unanswered, and you know, I was always afraid of the dark. I was a scared kid, but even though like I always felt that there was something in my closet, there was something under my bed, always, there was an energy in it. There was an energy in the fear, in the horror that I reveled in. And when I started writing, I knew I wanted to kind of play around in that as well. So it wasn't so much that I was looking for comfort. There's just something in me that likes to face the horror and just see what's in there, and knowing that when I go in there, it's still going to be dark. You know, there's something in me that enjoys that. So are you writing from a dark place within yourself, or are you writing trying to imagine what that dark place might feel like?
I think a little bit of both. I think a little bit of both, yeah.
Rebecca?
So when I was a teen, I was very shy, very reserved, and I remember reading Lord of the Rings. Like, I was obsessed with Lord of the Rings, and I wanted so bad to be able to be a character that was part of the Fellowship. And of course, all the Fellowship, they're all male. And I would literally pretend that I was Aragorn, because like I wanted that adventure. I wanted something unsafe. And so I think like with my own writing, like I wanted to write stories about girls going off and having adventures in these fantasy worlds where you can create anything.
That's a great answer. And actually, yet again, sort of is an access point to my next question for all of you, which is I was trying to think about what unites all of what you guys write. And there's a real sense of otherness to all of your lead characters, I think. Like, there's a real sense of outsiderness. I think most literally in the Divergent series and now in this new series, people who are literally different than everyone else in the world. But for all of you, I think there's a sense of otherness. And what interests me is, so we're now at this very dangerous moment, but also exhilarating moment where people who are different are being demonized, but are also finding community with each other and correspondence with each other and coming out into the light in a way that they never have been able to before. And I was wondering if you think, as you write, that you're conscious of writing about otherness as a subject, if you feel that everyone feels other, if you feel that you have any political responsibility. Maybe some of you voted for Trump.
No.
I didn't, but
I certainly did not.
I guess I'm curious about you. You're all writing about this subject that now suddenly has this incredible, pressing real-world significance, which is how do we treat people who are different than the so-called majority of people? And I'm wondering, is literature just the first sort of tremor? Is that why the last 10 years have been full of books like the ones that you five write, maybe, that are so concerned with what the other means? And centers the other, maybe. Anyone can kick us off.
I kind of feel like this has always been, so definitely you're right in that like we talk about this stuff more now, but there's always been people who are othered and maligned and disenfranchised. So it's like, and I feel like a lot of books, like historically and whatever.
I do feel like what Rebecca was saying though, like the pretty elves in Lord of the Rings and the sort of, it's a bunch of dudes going on an adventure. And
yeah.
it does feel like something's changed, but maybe not, I don't know. I'd be curious what the rest of you think. Like, do you feel, particularly maybe in reference to this insane political moment which we're going through, whether you feel your work is in response to that?
If it is for me, I don't think consciously. My most recent book, I feel like, dealt a lot with the isolation that comes with the otherness, and how even if you are surrounded by people, if you feel a certain way, it feels very isolated. It can pretty much rule how you respond and react to things. And my character feels very isolated in the sense that she isn't what society wants her to be in the 1950s. And as a result, she is pretty much deemed insane, goes to an insane asylum for reasons other than her supposed mental health issues. But at the same time, I kind of wanted to touch on how women's mental health was taken care of or not taken care of, reading about things like electroshock therapy and lobotomies, and more so why those things were done as opposed to what would happen to someone with those symptoms today. It's just not even the same, but it wasn't too long ago, so.
Wasn't it like hysteria or whatever was a common
hysteria.
Woman affliction?
Yeah.
It's really just like having feelings.
Correct. Yeah.
You sound hysterical, Veronica. Can you
I
just...
know, calm down, Veronica.
I think it also comes from just the word for uterus in Latin is hystera. So it was like, they're just like,
there
these
you go.
women
Yeah.
with their uteruses. Anyone else?
Yeah, I've been, I am a writer because I've lived being the other. It is nothing, it's certainly nothing new to me. I'm a Nigerian-American female writer writing science fiction and fantasy. And like the stories that I wanted to tell were because of being other. The Binge trilogy, for example, I wanted to see an African girl go into space on her own terms. That was the whole, that was one of the driving forces. Almost all of my, I think, 14 books have been, it's not in response, I wouldn't say it's in response to being other. It's more like wanting to see these stories told. Not seeing them told, not seeing one type of narrative and wanting to add to what's out there. A part of me definitely wants to destabilize the center. What narratives are told, what narratives are given precedence, that is something that I think about a lot. But you know, I've existed as other. So the standpoint that I write from, at least in the context of Western society, is from the other. So yeah.
I feel like Divergent especially was like a about an expression of like an emotional experience as a teenager, because I think when I was a teenager I was like, I'm different. See, all of my safety pin bracelets will tell you so. And as an adult I'm like, Veronica, you were living like in an upper middle class Chicago suburb as a white girl, getting a good education, like get over it. But Divergent was kind of the expression of that feeling, that like, I feel like I'm different, or I'm desperate to be different. I hope that I am unique or remarkable. And, you know, Carve and Mark is a little different. Certainly my main character, Syra, is kind of like living this isolated existence because of this supposed gift that she has, which she finds to be more of a curse. And the books are about her realizing how to become a part of something bigger, instead of like to the extent to which she has isolated herself, and that it's okay to be with other people, to trust them, and to find like common ground with them. So it's maybe more of like an individual experience, not like a greater commentary. And certainly not like, we start these books so much earlier, you know, than, so it's like not in response to anything, but of course like what's going on around you does inevitably affect like your writing, I think.
Well, Rebecca, I'm curious, you just went through this this is your first published book, maybe you have some books in your bottom shelf, but I'm curious about all five of you are world builders, and I'm curious how you begin that process, whether the characters come first, the story, the world itself, the idea, what happens first?
Okay, so for The Queen's Rising, it definitely began with character. This was like 3 years ago, and I was actually working on another fantasy idea that was terrible. But out of the blue, I saw a scene. It's this really beautiful sunlit library, and there was a girl sitting at a table, and across from her was a young man, and he was looking at her like he had just said something. And instead of responding to him, she spoke to me instead, and she said, "The summer solstice is in 8 days, and I have yet to master my passion." I was like, wait, like, who are you? What are you talking about? Like, I've never had a character just like fall from the sky and say something to me. So I wrote that line down before I forgot it. And then I was like, well, what is she talking about? What is this passion? And so I began to think of things in life that require a lot of time, that require devotion, your whole heart to master usually requires instruction. And so the first thing I wrote down was art, and I wrote down music, and I wrote down dramatics, which is theater, and then wit and knowledge. So these 5 things just kind of came to me. So I wrote them down, I was looking at them, and it made me think of like a Renaissance world. So I began to see the world just kind of unfold from that moment as well. And then I had to ask her, like, okay, Brianna, why are you worried you're not going to passion in time? Like, what is going on in your life? And so I began to write the first chapter from that scene, and I kind of learned like what had been going on, you know, what she was worried about. And I kind of knew like she was going to go through a challenge and a failure, but from that failure, another opportunity was going to arise, and that was the revolution for the queen. So it definitely began like with character, and then I just kind of worked my way out with like all the other little details.
Just as an interjection, do you actually talk to your character? Like, so Brianna, what are you going to do now? Like,
I talk to myself a lot, so yes.
Anyone else? I mean, Daniel, with Troll Hunters, for instance, I'm curious, that's like the young character stumbles into a world that's like beneath our, you know, sort of alongside our own. How did that go? Did you have the idea of the secondary world first, or of like a teenager? What popped into your mind?
I think it was, I'm trying to remember how Guillermo and I said about this. I think, for me, it was much more about the real world, and then finding parallels or things that were the real world could bounce off of, or opposites, or, you know, anything that the book, which is quite a bit different than the TV show, really is sort of about a kid who has weaknesses in his real life that in sort of the underworld are the strengths. So it's really a matter of figuring out what the weakness was to be, what those equivalents, how this weakness in this world could be a strength in this world, and sort of aligning those. Now, on top of that, Guillermo came to the table with just a bunch of fantastical troll ideas.
That sounds like him.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's about right for him. And so he he came to the table with a lot of like backstory, like historical backstory, where the trolls came from, et cetera, et cetera. And I augmented that with studying the oldest troll, like folk tales and Nordic folk tales and whatnot that we could find, and then using that as a structure or a base to build upon. Not that anyone's ever going to notice any of that stuff, but for some reason it's satisfying to do.
I think it's been different for all my books. My first book, I feel like I wrote the entire thing around one scene, which involved fire ants. And it was like a very random, horrifying scene in my head, and I was like, if I can figure out a book to put that scene in, that would be cool.
What a great reason to write a book.
Other times it was like more so of like a premise. Like for Nightingale, it was one of those like wonderful moments where the whole idea comes at once in a flash and it feels wonderful. That's more rare, but I was more so along the line of thinking, I had been asked to write a blog post on how I felt about being a female horror author, and at first I was like annoyed to be asked that because I was like, why should it matter that I'm female? What would make unique to that process? Ended up going down this train of thought, which eventually led me to thinking of authors like Shirley Jackson and Sylvia Plath. And I thought to myself, I wish Sylvia Plath had written a horror novel. And what would that be like if she had? And right when I thought that, it was just like, it came all at me at once, like a sort of nightmarish version of the bell jar. And that felt good.
That's so cool.
That's that's perfect.
Yeah.
It explains so much.
Right.
What about you, Veronica? Is it the world building? Is it the lead character? Is it the idea of the...
I think it's sort of different every time, like Amy said, but with Carve the Mark, I had a story idea. I came up with it when I was really young, just the basic like outline of it, which is like young man gets kidnapped and taken into like enemy territory, and then he comes back and he's all like traumatized now and different. And how does this family react to that, basically? So this is like, I don't know what was going on when I was 12, but just like some kind of, it just shows you what I was like, I guess. And I kept trying to set it in different worlds, which, you know, I couldn't find the right one. So it was like, when I first wrote it, I had just seen the Lord of the Rings movie, the first one, The Fellowship of the Ring. And so it was just Lord of the Rings, but with this storyline. So elves, whatever, you know. And then, you know, I tried it as like urban fantasy, I tried it, whatever. It didn't work until Carve the Mark, because this expansive galaxy created a lot of opportunities for world building that I appreciated and had fun with, and I could create these languages and stuff.
Did the idea of like current come to you early on?
Well,
or?
I love people with powers. I'm trying to just like lean into the tropes I like instead of trying to, like, I just, like, why not have fun with the things that you love, you know? Instead of trying to be like, I'm gonna avoid all the tropes. P.S. Impossible.
Exactly.
So it's like, people with powers, I'm going with it. And the powers are like expressions of their psyche, and they're mostly like, they're like half curse, half power. And I was like, yes. So that was really where the current stuff came from.
That's so funny. I have a friend who teaches creative writing, and she said, she tells all her students, you should just write about whatever the 5 things you Google the most are. And everyone says to her, like, oh, you mean like Nazis, like everyone? And she's like, not everyone Googles Nazis all the time.
Yeah, I was like, the weather?
You should be writing about Nazis. And everyone's like, oh, you mean Victorian cabs? Like, and she's like, that's what you need to be writing about. So yeah, whatever you're most obsessed with, just write about that. So Nnedi, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Yeah. What was the question again?
World building.
World building.
The world,
yeah.
sort of
what
what
comes
comes
with
first?
your-
How?
Yeah. For me, it's always the character. It's always a character,
Interesting.
and like in all of my books, it will start with hearing the character speaking to me, and when my characters speak to me, they really speak to me. Some of them are mean. Some of them are very pushy. When I was writing the Book of Phoenix, for example, she was just like, I know all of this sounds very strange, but it's not. She was so pushy to get her story to me, to tell me her story, that I remember at one point I was really exhausted and I tried to take a nap. And when I took the nap, she was in my head saying, get up, finish my story, keep going. So I dragged myself up and continued writing. So like my characters always come to me first, and then the rest kind of illuminates from them through their eyes. So the world, like I'm very strong with world building, but I have to see that world through my characters' eyes. So my characters are very much, they come to me whole, they come to me strong, and they come to me complete.
That's fascinating.
I'm jealous of that, actually.
Yeah, I mean, that's like
the character's always the hardest part for me.
Yeah, I guess everyone's good at different things, it sounds like. Everyone has different. So these are all sort of abstract questions. I'm curious more about like your actual writing practice, like how you became writers, if you have a ritual every day, if there's any advice you have to young writers. Just sort of an open-ended, what do you make of writing? How did you fall into this? Why are any of you considering quitting? I think about quitting, which is why I'm asking. It's very hard.
What would you do? Like do you have like a backup plan? Like are you gonna move to Halifax and become like a fisherman? Like
Where did you get my diary?
I don't know.
I don't have a backup plan. I think, well, I always think like if I were on a desert island alone and I knew no rescue was coming, would I still write stuff down? And I think I still would. And so that's like when I'm at my most despairing, I think like, well, maybe I am a writer. But I'm curious how you all became writers and what your practice is now as you've matured. All of you have, except for Rebecca, published numerous books. And what made you the writer you are now, and what kind of writer are you now?
I actually didn't always know I wanted to be a writer. I always loved reading since I was very young, but I had lots of fun in creative writing assignments in school, but I didn't really think that was a realistic goal for me, especially since when I finished high school, there was no career I wanted that required a college degree, so I never went to college, and that's not something that I would have thought was possible if you wanted to be something like an author. So I was kind of in this like, what do I do with my life phase. Thought, oh, maybe I'll be a dental assistant. And like, I loved all
I'm so glad you don't have a pair of dental pliers, having read your work.
Oh, I know. Teeth, there's endless horror inspiration for teeth stuff. But when I actually started dental assisting, I hated it. So I quit like literally the first day, which is how I am.
What did you hate most about it?
What I hated most about it was how you're holding like a tube with a hole at the end, it's like a little suction, and the dentist is like, all right, I'm gonna pull this tooth out. It might pop out and fly out, and you need to catch it with this little thing, otherwise they could aspirate on it and die. So I was like, yeah, no, I'm not, I am not cut out for this. I've always been the type where if I didn't love what I was doing, I wouldn't do it, to the point where I was an awful like employee, kind of like.
So let me understand this correctly. Every time I go to the dentist, I might aspirate and die if they don't catch.
Yeah, you could, man. Don't keep your throat closed if you're getting a tooth extracted. You don't
keep
want
my throat closed.
Yeah, keep it closed.
What?
This is the kind of thing I will
If you breathe that shit in, like it'll get stuck. You can't get it out once it's in. Not to freak you out or anything. But,
it's way too late.
So basically,
Well, this has been the dental
super
panel.
depressed about this. No, yeah, pretty much.
That's amazing. Yeah, that is one of those stranger things.
When I was little, I used to love to read. I haven't done that in a while. Maybe I'll go to the library. And I rented like a huge stack of books. And one of the books, I thought I knew how it was going to end. Like, I felt so good about myself, like, oh, I already know how it's going to end. It's going to be awesome. I had this elaborate ending that I 100% knew for sure was going to happen, and then it didn't happen. And I was kind of just like shook from it, like, what? That's not fair. But then it was honestly like a light switch in my head. I thought, I could write a story with that ending. I had like no like background. I literally like went to my husband. I was like, I think I'm gonna try to write a book. And he was like, do you even like to write? And I was like, I think I love to read. So like I spent the whole next day like outlining my first novel, which thank goodness did not sell. Because it was just, a very sad girl whose best friend get murdered, and at the end there's like a body in an oven, which my agent was like, that's a first sign that you were going to be a horror author, because I actually didn't write horror until like my 4th book, which was my first book published. But it was very self-taught in that way. I just tried to, whenever I would reread what I'd written so far, I would try to imagine if I was reading it, if I'd be satisfied. I felt like, especially as I got more into the process, I got an agent, I started going on submission to publishers, I felt like all my colleagues and friends around me were so well educated, which is not something I was or even am now. And it was very intimidating, but I mean, I kind of just went with it, and it's worked out so far.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, I really just want to talk more about dental stuff. I mean, I bet a bunch of people out there have like weird teeth dreams, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I've never had that
Yeah.
dream where all your teeth fall out, which is supposed to be the
I've
most
had-
common
Yeah.
dream.
Oh, it's bad.
Many
It's bad.
times.
I have the one where I'm late for a final exam and I realized I didn't take the class. Have you guys ever had that? Someone else tell me you've had that. No. Yes, hooray. Okay, good.
I had a tooth crumbling dream. That was the worst
Yeah.
dream I've ever had.
Had
They
that
just
too.
all like,
They're all crumbling?
yes, they crumbled like crackers in my mouth.
What is
Mine
what is
are
the
always
name
like
for that,
there's
Amy?
gum in my mouth, like too much bubble gum, and my
had
teeth
that
are
too.
coming out in the
Had
bubble
all
gum, and I
this.
can't get it out. But
I think that means all these are going to come true, guys. No, I'm just kidding.
What are you trying to do to me?
I'm so sorry. 1,000 pardons. So, Daniel, how did you become a dentist?
Jesus Christ. God, writing. Okay. How did it happen?
I mean,
Right.
you don't have to answer it if you
Yeah, you can answer whatever you
I
want.
want to know.
Well, okay. I grew up in a very small town in Iowa, and there was no opportunities for an event like this. There was no realm in which being a writer was a viable profession. Like, not only did I not know any writers, I didn't know anyone who knew anyone who knew anyone who knew anyone that was a writer. I mean, it was an impossibility. So even though I was writing book-length manuscripts by the time I was in middle school, I just read them myself and found satisfaction in them and put them in a drawer, and that was it. And then when it was time to go to college, it was like, well, you're gonna get an education and get a normal job. It wasn't until I was really in my 20s and I began to sort of, inch out into the wider world that I realized that maybe it was possible. But I think in that way things are better now. Like, I think it's better and worse in some ways. I think young people can just go on YouTube and they can see people like themselves succeeding in so many different ways, and that's maybe a blessing and a curse, because now you're seeing all these people like you who are succeeding, and why aren't you able to do that? And is the fame you want, why do you want it? And I think there's all these other new problems that are on top of that, whereas when I was a kid, it was much purer to the extent that I wasn't even showing anyone what I wrote, and I was totally cool with that. And I think that's what has helped me the most as a writer today. This is sort of a tangent, but that back then the writing itself became the whole point. I didn't show it to anybody, and I didn't care. I just wrote it, and it was like, this was a good experience for me, and I put it away, and that's what I did for many years. And today, that's still my inclination. Is I write the book, now I give it to my agent and they sell it, but I still more or less, that's it. I don't care. I don't generally read any reviews or read any sort of really feedback at all. It's still just for me about doing the work and finding pleasure in the work, and I think that's, if I'm doing anything right, I feel like that's what I'm doing right. Like, it feels like that's something I can keep doing, and I can extend that to the future indefinitely as long as I'm happy with what I'm doing. So best of luck doing that. It's not easy.
Nnedi?
Yeah, let me add to your comments. I think that, because I think that's really useful for new writers to hear, that that whole idea of just writing and enjoying the writing for yourself, and not thinking about all of the other influences of, okay, is this gonna sell? Is this good? And thinking of none of that, and just writing for the love of it. Because when I first started writing, which was when I was 19, between 19 and 20, I had the same experience. I was not thinking about getting published at all. It never crossed my mind. I don't come from a family of writers. I come from a family mainly of doctors, and so that's not something that you do in my family. Going into any kind of the arts is not something that you do.
You're also a doctor, though.
Yeah. Yes, doctor of literature. Yeah, I'd have 2 masters and a PhD, but that's a different topic.
When they ask for a doctor on a plane, have you ever stood up and been like...
That actually happened recently, and I thought about it. I'm like, I'm a doctor.
What do you need me to read?
Exactly. But
so
yeah,
sorry.
when I first started, I did spend 8 years of writing, just writing for myself and not thinking about even showing it to anybody. And I wrote, I think during that time I wrote maybe five novels where I finished them, edited them, and polished them, and then when they were finished, I just put them aside and started again, and just continued that process. And in that way, I was able to, one, develop my voice, develop a unique voice, and kind of see what it is that I'm doing without anyone else's input and anyone else kind of influencing the direction that I wanted to go. And also, I developed my routine of writing novels. So I got faster and faster each time. And so by the time I was published, I was ready. I felt strong enough in what I was writing. I knew what I was doing. And when the rejections come, because they always come, I was strong enough to withstand them. So I think that's really important, to have that time in the beginning where you're not worrying about the outside world, where you're just kind of focusing on what you're doing and enjoying it. And I think the joy of it is really important. Enjoying writing, enjoying storytelling for new writers is really, really important. Really quickly, the way that I started writing is it's a long story, and it involves going through a trauma, because before I was 19, I'd never written anything creatively at all. I never thought to. I loved reading, but it wasn't something that ever crossed my mind. And so I was an athlete for a long time. I played semi-pro tennis and was a track star, all that stuff. And I had scoliosis, and I'm just going to summarize this really quickly. Had to have surgery for the scoliosis, was paralyzed, and in the hospital during that dark time, I had to, it was either go crazy or figure some way out to not go into that dark place. And that was writing for me. So writing was always a therapeutic thing for me. But once I started writing, I knew, one, that I was really good at it, and two, that I loved it. And soon after I recovered from that experience, which took me several months. I had to learn how to walk again, all of that. I took a creative writing class and never looked back from that point on.
That's inspiring.
I have something to add, just kind of along these lines, about like the joyful period of when you're by yourself with a thing. So a lot of times I have this kind of interaction that troubles me when people come through the signing line to get their book signed, and I say, how are you, whatever. And often young people will say to me, I really want to be an author. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome. What do you like to write? And they're like, and they don't have anything that they like to write. They don't really write. They're like, I don't write a lot. And I'm just like, listen, you dream whatever you want to dream, but you're not going to be able to bear rejection if you don't love the thing you're doing while you're doing it. And there's a part in Amy Poehler's book, Yes, Please, that says the people she knows who are most successful are completely uninterested in the results of what they've created. It's out there, people like it, people hate it, it does well, it doesn't do well, okay, some of those things will make you sad or whatever, but mostly they don't care. What they love is the process of doing it, the actual feeling of doing it. And for me, that's what writing always was. It's just this isn't an assignment. I'm not writing to finish. I didn't care if I finished until I wanted to be a professional writer later on in life. I have 30 unfinished manuscripts in my folder from between ages 11 and 18. I just loved it so much, and I still love it so much. On the days when something really hard will happen to me, I still return to it and do it and feel better. And so that's what I want to tell young people when they want to be an author. It's like, okay, don't worry about being an author. Like, think about figuring out the thing that you like to do, that you just like to do.
Well, and all of you have said you have a bunch of unfinished books that came before the real first book, which I think is something that a lot of young writers don't know. And so they put immense pressure on themselves. Rebecca, what was your experience like?
So I'd always been writing since I was a kid. I loved reading, so I was always very drawn to telling stories. So I did a lot of writing as a teen. I would spend all these hours in my room with my headphones, writing by hand. So naturally, when it came time to go to college, I wanted to study English. And I would get this reaction a lot where people would be like, oh, what are you studying? I'm studying English. Oh, are you going to teach? And I'd be like, no. And they would just look at me like, what are you going to do with that? And it was like, because I love reading and writing, so I'm studying what I'm passionate about. And I'm really glad that I stuck with it. And I got a good full-time job after graduating. You know, people are like, oh, you're never going to find a good job, with English degree. And so I woke up one morning, though, and I was like, I realized I hadn't been writing at all lately. I was just consumed with doing the 9 to 5, and I was like, one day I'm going to wake up, I'm going to be like 90 years old, and I will not have written anything, and I'm going to regret that. So I began to get very diligent. Like when I came home from work, I was tired, but I would start writing again, and then on the weekends. So I just began to devote a lot of time to it. And this is kind of a funny story, but I didn't have a laptop at the house, and my husband had just like launched his own landscaping company. So he was like doing that on the side while working full-time at this golf course. So I talked him into buying a laptop and using it as a write-off for his landscape company. So he was like, okay. So we went to Best Buy, and of course you always end up spending more money than you plan. And so we walk out, and I'm like so excited because I have a laptop. I can finally spend more time writing. And I look at Ben, and he's like white as a sheet. And I'm like, what's wrong? And he's like, I've been saving this money for months, and you just blew it all on a laptop. Like he was trying to buy a truck. And so I was like, I felt really bad. So I was like, you know what? I promise, like I'm gonna write a book on this laptop, and when it sells, I will buy you a truck. And he just kind of looked at me like, oh my word, what are you even talking about? But literally 4 months later, I saw the scene with Brianna and began drafting the book, and it was this can't eat, can't sleep type of first draft where I was like, it was all I could think about. And so I drafted the book really quickly, and I was like, I don't know if this is any good. So I have 2 younger sisters. They're a lot younger than me. They're teens. And so I was like, y'all read this and just tell me if it's any good. And when they came back, we're like, we absolutely love this. It gave me the confidence I needed to begin even thinking about getting it published. And I actually dedicated the book to them because I was like, if it wasn't for them, this book would still be on my laptop. And I did. I have bought my husband a truck, so I upheld my deal. But it's on loan, so he's paying me back. But still, he got his truck out of it. So.
I love that you actually bought him a truck. That's awesome.
You're like, take that.
Yeah.
I think we have about 10 minutes, so if anyone has questions, maybe we could do 1 or 2 for these amazing panelists. Sure? Yes?
A number of you have written for multiple age ranges, both children, teenagers, adults. What age group do you most enjoy writing for?
I'll just repeat the question because they've asked me to do that. She asked a great question. Many of you have written for multiple age ranges. Which age group do you maybe like writing best for?
Older teens and adults.
The world of the weight is on Daniel's shoulders.
For some reason, I feel like this is a weird answer, but I want to say adults.
Ah.
Why is it weird?
Well, I just feel like it's going to disappoint some people in some way.
I kind of feel like I'll just write for anyone who will read it. Like I love visiting schools, so I will say that. I think I would miss that if I wasn't writing YA. They don't really let you come to schools with your adult book.
That's for sure.
Yeah. So I would miss that a lot. I love teenagers, and I love talking to them and hearing all their many wise thoughts, and also their enthusiasm for things I've never heard of. One time a girl came in a line and was like, "Who's your favorite One Direction person?" And this was before they were everywhere, and I was like, what, is One Direction a band? Like, what? She was so disappointed. Oh. I felt so bad.
Hold on. I think we need to know, who is your favorite One Direction?
I don't know.
It's obviously Zayn, right? No, doesn't
I have
Zayn
no
fly?
idea what their names are. Zayn, I do know his name.
I don't know anyone in One Direction. Nnedi, what about?
Sure you don't.
Yeah, not Neil or Liam or Harry or any of them.
No comment. For me, it's like the story dictates what it is. So I wouldn't say, I can't really say that any of them are my favorite. I think all of them are my favorite. It just really depends on the story that I'm writing.
Good answer.
Yeah.
And Rebecca?
Well, so far I've only written for young adults, but I don't know, we'll see.
Yeah, sure.
So, I'm a film student here in Chicago, and so for those of you who have written for film before, how do you go through the process of keeping the character development that you've written about and putting that into a more concise version?
So the question was, for those of you who've been through the process of making a film out of your book, how do you keep or retain the credibility of the character development? Is that roughly correct? Okay, yeah.
I'm learning that, well, first I have my novel, Who Fears Death, is being developed by HBO into a TV show. So I'm going through exactly that process right now. And I can't really say, like, how do you keep the character's integrity there, like, because I haven't gotten to the end of it yet, and I'm in the especially the beginning process of it. But what I do know is that the author involvement is really key to that. Some writers don't want to be a part of it. They're okay with just having their book optioned and then stepping back and letting whoever do whatever they're going to do with it. But for me, keeping that integrity is very, very important. So for me, I made sure that I am a part, even though I didn't want to write especially the initial pilot episode, I wanted to be deeply involved, and I make sure that I'm deeply involved, and I made sure of that contractually, because I am a consultant for the project. So because of that, and also I made sure just to vet who was optioning my work, and I didn't just have anyone. I didn't just agree to anybody optioning it. I made sure that it was exactly who I wanted to option that work, because I think that who you allow to option your work also will affect the integrity of your character. So just you have to be really careful about the whole process and make sure that you're highly involved and pick and choose. Don't just let whomever take your work and do whatever they're going to do with it.
Veronica, I feel like you have special...
Oh, yeah, I mean, my journey is a little more typical in that I was not like, the book was optioned before it had even come out, so I had no leg to stand on negotiation-wise, like contractually. So it was, I felt like I had an instinct about the people who made it, and to a certain degree I was right. Like, I think the first movie turned out like pretty faithful to the book and the characters, and then it's sort of like those people started to change, the people you initially sign on with, and suddenly it was like, I don't know who these people are anymore exactly. Like, the movies are still really fun, they changed my entire life, so I'm not like angry at it or anything, but what I'm saying is, like, I gave feedback to be like, this is what the character is. And they'd be like, uh-huh. And then it would disappear into nowhere. So I think that's pretty normal experience for an author. Like, people think of, like, ask if you control this thing or another thing with movies. And I'm like, who actually does control that? Because, like, is it the director? Is it the writer? No, it's definitely not the writer. Is it the studio? Is it the producers? It's all of these people working together. So there's no one voice in the room that gets to be like, you're doing that wrong, except the guy who holds the wallet, I think.
Well, I'll tell you, I sometimes get to do this thing where I fly somewhere for like 4 days and they cut you a big check and you write punch-up, like you do jokes for the movie. So I do that for movies like Ghostbusters or whatever. And they will flip a coin to see who has to talk to the writer for the initial like source material, because they don't care. And so I think like your journey is much more admirable than most writers, because most writers just take the check and then just, it's good to be zen. Like, it sounds like you just sort of let it go a little bit.
Well, I was definitely involved.
Of course, sure.
I give a lot of feedback, but like, they don't have to take my feedback any more than they have to take the actor's feedback or the producer's feedback. Like, it's just, sometimes it gets in, sometimes it doesn't. I tried not to let it go, but at a certain
Did it
point,
drive
like,
you a tiny bit crazy?
Yeah, a little. I mean, it did a little, but I mean, I'm not trying to like crap on the whole process because clearly, like I got to go on movie sets. It was amazing, and it put my book in front of a lot more people than ever would have seen it without. So it's like, and this is like complaining about and having too tight diamond shoes or something. It's like this is not a good thing.
That is a hassle, though.
Oh yeah, so difficult, the diamond shoes.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes, one more question. Yeah.
I actually had a writing question, and I think you all are like almost perfect to answer this question. So with world building, when we're writing like a novel that's not necessarily set in our world, what happens? What do you do when you get stuck in that world? Because there's only so many avenues that you can go down because it isn't the natural world. What happens when you deal with that particular kind of writer's block?
So what happens when the world you're building proliferates out of control and you have to make choices and cut it down and reduce it, I guess? Is that about?
Like you know where you want to go with the character, but it's just like where you're stuck.
You're stuck.
If I'm stuck at a certain point in the story, it usually means I need to take a step back, read everything that came before it leading up to it, to see if I can pinpoint where it went wrong, so to speak, in correlation with like my original vision. Because it's really easy if you have any sort of plot hole to fill, to sort of hyper-focus to a point where you really get too closer than is necessary. And then if you can take a deep breath and step back and look at it just much more simply, it falls together a lot easier that way, I think.
Well, I see the time's up things
Yeah,
going
Yeah,
on.
they're yelling at us. The time's up. Does anyone have a good button for this question?
A button, no. I pass.
I have I guess a little tidbit that could be a button. My professor in college used to tell me that the answer to your end is in the beginning, so don't introduce something new at the like 3/4 point in your story. Look at what you've already built.
Oh, that's good advice. All right, everyone give a hand to these amazing authors.